the government continuing to sell these tax cuts for middle Australia. We've just heard from the Treasurer, but there's a lot of people commenting, Trudy McIntosh, as we go live to Canberra now, about the Prime Minister being booed at the Australian Open last night. Is this particularly remarkable, or is it tradition, as Anthony Albanese suggests?
Well, he laughed it off twice this morning, Laura, saying it's tradition, and I'll have to say it's tradition for our Prime Ministers now to say that when this happens to them. Scott Morrison saying that very same thing when he was booed at the Australian Open back in 2019. We've certainly seen it before. Anthony Albanese, as you recall, booed before the election, the memorable one at the Blues Fest, and he went on to win, as we recall, back in 2022. Laughing it off this morning, the opposition going in a little hard, but you could hardly say full-throated given the boos we saw directed at the predecessor, Scott Morrison. Have a look at the booing and the response we've seen today.
The Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese. The Deputy Victorian Premier, the Honourable Ben Carroll. Thank you.
Oh, no, it's an Australian tradition.
You're saying that like you've booed other Prime Ministers at the footy and that sort of stuff.
No, but I've been at a lot of sporting events.
Albo, maybe it's because, obviously, at the tennis, for me, when I think tennis, I think a lot of rich people go to the tennis. Maybe it's because of those stage 3 tax cuts.
Well, everyone at the tennis who's the taxpayer last night will get a tax cut.
A small focus group at the Australian Open last night, I suspect, on the broken promise and the lie that the Prime Minister had been making for the last week. But look, I think there's a long way to go, and that's part and parcel of being a politician sometimes.
Yeah, I think David Littleproud's pretty spot on with that one. Perhaps it is a bit of a tradition. It's something all politicians are wary of when they go to big sporting events or music events for that matter. But to the substantive debate today, there's a lot of talk now and questions being asked about perhaps what this government is looking at next. Now, the Treasurer has just said he's not contemplating any changes to negative gearing.
Well, Laura, this is going to be the inevitable whack-a-mole we're going to play for some time now. When you break such a big promise as this, something the Treasurer and Prime Minister said ad nauseum both before and after the election that you weren't going to tinker at all with stage 3 tax cuts, and then you do that, regardless of whether you think people are ultimately benefiting and therefore will forgive you, it opens up the door for a floodgate of other questions about what else you're potentially willing to break. And that's been helped along this morning by Labor backbenchers privately telling the Australian newspaper they want to see this policy revisited. It's something we know Jim Chalmers previously believed in when he worked as the shadow finance spokesperson under Bill Shorten. So for Jim Chalmers this morning, brushing this away, saying they're not contemplating anything when it comes to negative gearing.
We're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
Are you prepared to break other promises if there are better ways, or is this one and done?
We're not contemplating other areas.
What about the rest of stage 3? We know that it's been re-geared to give more money to people at the lower end, but Labor previously supported and voted in the Parliament when the Morrison government implemented stage 3 to remove that 37% tax bracket for those earning between $120,000 and $180,000. It was designed to tackle bracket creep. The Treasurer confirming a short time ago to Tom Connell on Sky News, he was there at that press conference, that essentially there's no stage 4. They're not going to try and do this down the track.
Where does that leave what you didn't enact or what you're not going to enact in stage 3? So the changes you didn't make, are they still on the table? They might be where you move next, or are they just scrapped?
Well, we don't consider them as a piece of unfinished business. You know, the precise tax design that Scott Morrison legislated 5 years ago, what we've shown is that our income tax policies need to keep up with the economic conditions and the budget realities. And so we're not leaving Scott Morrison's tax cuts in a drawer somewhere and hoping to put them in place at some future point.
So no unfinished business. It sounds like that's it for tax relief, Laura, ahead of the next election, but they're not contemplating anything else. Who knows? Still a long way to run.